we're talking all things e-commerce, trends, updates, what's going on in the world of eComm. And, here with Cody Rich, you run Backcountry Fuel Box, and of course the Rich Outdoors podcast. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about both of those?
Sure. Yeah. So, let's go back here, like 10 years kind of doing the e-commerce internet business thing. Like I'm the typical read the 4-hour work week, thought I was going to start a business and never have to work again. Turns out that's not entirely accurate, but it's not completely far off either. So I started my first business, kind of went through that one's ups and downs, started a podcast to figure out what was next. The podcast really took off, started my third business. There's a few like other rabbit hole businesses in there, but I would say like third successful business as Backcountry Fuel, which is a subscription box. And that's my current project that I'm working on. And the podcast is kind of always there, but it's a great networking tool. It's a great way to meet people, interview people, keep up to date and all those things. I also run a little group called Bozeman Entrepreneurs, which is just an entrepreneurial group out of Bozeman, Montana, where I'm from. And, we have everyone from small startups, e-commerce businesses, all kinds of stuff, media companies, photography businesses, all those kinds of things. So I get to dabble in a little bit of all of it. And I try to stay up to speed on kind of all types of businesses, because that's what's interesting.
Yeah, no, I hear you. So Bozeman, how's
Bozeman, man, Los Angeles.
how's Bozeman going during this whole I know you and I have chatted back and forth about the housing market. It's just like ridiculous. I imagine Bozeman's up there too with just craziness.
Dude, it's insane. Yeah, I always said the internet makes the world flat, but I think COVID put that into hyperspeed, and all these people just realized, oh, I work on the internet, I could live anywhere. And instantly, apparently Bozeman was on this flyer that went out to everyone in the world. And so people are just moving here like crazy. We'll see if they make it a winter though. But Bozeman's cool. It's got it's kind of got this little startup vibe going on. I feel like there's a lot of cities that are kind of like that nowadays. I mean, we walked Silicon Valley was the hub, right? But now it's Austin. It's, I don't know, Boulder was kind of one for quite a while. So I think there's a lot of entrepreneurs that kind of want to live in that mountain town, and Bozeman's perfect for that. The internet, despite, popular belief, the internet is okay in Montana.
Yeah. And I think it's following this case of that show Nomadland, where I think that there's trends here. And the reason I think there's trends, if we see how generations before us sort of wanted to get out and move, I go back to, I was having a conversation with my mom about her grandfather, who he moved all over the US, but that was the thing in the early 1900s, right? Especially after World War I, where they were nomads, for better lack of a word, right? And then that led into the Great Depression, which more people became nomadic because they had to move. They had to move for work. So, and then you see that again in the 60s and 70s, right? And then you see this more stability of the suburbs in the 90s. Suburbs. In the 90s. And then I think sort of what this changing culture has led into is we're seeing this population dispersion. And so it's interesting to see that. I think you combine that with a shortage on everything, right? From labor to wood to and this gets more on topic of even looking at brands that are trying to work in this. I don't even want to call it the new normal. It's just a new era, right? Everything's changed.
Right.
COVID changed everything. And I don't think we're ever going back to where we were before.
No, totally. And well, I mean, this is the thing about business, and you and I have this discussion before, but on the podcast, it's you look at trends, and trends are just it's ever changing, and it's always going to change. And this is the thing, there's a bunch of people getting into entrepreneurship, if you will, it's the cool thing to do right now. And the thing is I feel trends have always been happening throughout time. I just feel trends happen faster and faster in today's economy. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, for the most part, I think what happens is people right now are in this state of, I don't want to say open-mindedness because that's not the right word, because people are definitely not more open-minded right now, but it's like people want something different.
Yeah.
Right. And so when these major influences come along, it's easy to hop on that bandwagon and go.
Yeah.
When you look at our generation, right, the millennials, and the distribution of wealth across the board, right? Because people are living longer. So our parents, when they were our age, their folks didn't live as long. So they had a bigger concentration of wealth. So now we've sort of lost that, but we're trying to find our way within this new economy. Right.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I would agree with that. I mean, it's just like, it's funny. It's ever changing. And we could dive into like micro changes. Like, I don't know exactly where you want to go with this, but what's your direction?
Well, for me and what I've been sort of reading into the past couple months, especially with population dispersion and looking at the average cost of returns across the board, right? It costs a brand on average 30% more than the cost of the sale to return an item because of population dispersion. People aren't clumped up in big groups anymore, right? So it's costing more to deal with returns. That also leads into a much bigger conversation about Amazon, because Amazon led us down this path where people might overbuy and then return half of it. Right.
Totally.
We're seeing that a lot more now, where return rates are just spiking through the roof because, hey, you know what? I know that either A, I can return it for free, right? Or B, they'll just say, hey, you just hold on to it because it's going to cost more for us to get that product back. Right.
Totally. Dude, I mean, that's a whole rabbit hole we could dive into, like the whole Amazon culture of e-commerce, right? So like, I feel like this is it's a pendulum for sure. But like Amazon comes along and you're like, holy hell, this is convenient, right? Like everything I want in one place, one click. I almost just think about it and it shows up at my door, which like made this culture of people that it's just like very habitual, right? And for the most part, they became this like monster. It was like hard to own an e-commerce, and I remember talking to buddies, this is like 3 or 4, maybe 5 years ago, that were thinking about e-commerce. I'm like, man, how are you going to compete with Amazon? Like, this is like, you just can't do it, right? Like, it almost seemed like they were willing to just push everybody out, lose money on every single deal just to win. But then, I do feel like we're starting to come back, and I'm curious your thoughts on this, but I feel like we're starting to swing back where, some of these niche products, like there's so much on Amazon and you're kind of getting sometimes the junk, right? People play the reviews card and they get their products up there. And, even if it's like most of the best pick on Amazon or whatever, like it's still kind of sometimes a crap product. And so I feel like the pendulum is swinging back the other way, and it's starting to be like, okay, I'll go to these like niche e-commerce stores again. I mean, do you agree with that, or is it like still Amazon's the end all be all?
I think what people are seeing is naturally they don't want to go to Amazon because they're this giant corporate entity, right? They're the company man now.
Yeah.
And everyone knows that. Everyone's seen enough documentaries and heard enough in the news to know Amazon doesn't treat their employees well. Like there's a trade-off for this convenience, right? Yeah. It costs people something, right? They continue to go to Amazon for the convenience, right? Because it's easy. But I don't necessarily agree that they go to Amazon for high ticket products, right? A lot of brands we work with that do high ticket products do well, and we never have to compete with Amazon, because if you're going there for something, you want to know more and get more information, and you can't really do that with Amazon because it's a giant marketplace. And on top of that, you want to, especially after this past year, you want to support your local brands or the brands that as much as possible. Like I think everyone's trying hard to do that. So I think people are going a little bit out of their way to do that, but it always comes back on convenience. Amazon is so flipping convenient.
Dude, no. Okay. This could get an entire conversation, but I want to circle back to that, the whole Amazon thing. But one of the trends that you see, and it goes into like what you're talking about, like people want to buy from the people they know, like, and trust. That's always been a thing, right? And when people are watching, like we will maybe not shop at Amazon. We're like, oh, like it is like cool to post like, oh, I bought from such and such who donates, more and more. And so like, that has this vanity metric to it where people like will do the right thing if someone's watching, but then go order on Amazon when no
Oh
one's
yeah,
watching.
totally.
But one of the trends that I've been seeing, and I just had this conversation. So like shirts and hats brands, right? A lot of people will get into the shirts and hats game and or clothing in general, right? So clothing, let's say our generation grew up and you had like name brand stuff. One of the trends I'm seeing is a lot of these name brands branching off and creating very niche sub brands. So they're like, they make the best shorts for athletic women that are 25 to 35. Like that's what this brand specializes in. And I think what it boils down to is that people like, when you find music that's like this niche music no one's ever heard of, and you get this little high because like you text it to your buddy, you're like, oh, have you heard of this band? You're like, ooh, I found that before anybody else, right? Yeah. And now it's like the same thing with products, right? They're like, oh, where'd you get those shorts? Oh, well, I found them, like it's this little brand no one's heard of. It's like becoming the cool thing. And it's not like cool to wear Adidas or Reebok anymore. I don't know if it ever was, but my point is like you find these like little niche clothing companies. And what I think you're seeing is like large brands, they're acquiring some of these like small pub style. I always say that because the same thing happened in the beer industry, right? Like it was cool to drink Coors Light or Busch Light, and then all of a sudden it was like cool to drink craft beer, and everyone was like 10 Barrel or whatever the next like niche thing. You're like, oh yeah, I went there. But then the big brands are like, oh, we're losing market share. We'll just buy up these little pubs and use their brands, but still people went to them. So I think you're seeing that trend across e-commerce as a whole. But I would say you're especially seeing it in clothing brands and people creating like these small niche work brands, right? And this work brand's attached to some bigger conglomerate, but it's like this like face for this particular demographic.
No, yeah, for sure. And then on top of that, I mean, obviously I'm here in Portland, right? Like we started this years ago, right? This idea of like, look at how cool I am because of the brand I'm wearing or the non-brand.
Right. Yeah, it's the non-brand.
These pair of shorts were weaved together in someone's back room, right? It's like just weird stuff. But no, I think that if we look at influencers in general and how they've been able to push product, and now this new shift where influencers are now being able to white label their own products, right? Which I think in general, I think at the end of the day, I'm talking like 5-10 years, this is bad for influencers, right? Just like you don't really go to Amazon for high-end products. It's the same thing because you're gonna be like, oh, I'll buy it from them, but I know it's gonna be shit. Like I'm not gonna spend a lot. Right. I mean, people say it with Kylie Jenner's makeup. They know that too. Right. And not only that, but they lie about the numbers and everything. So it's, it's interesting to sort of see this new sort of form of social popularity. Right.
Right. Well, and as soon as like, the Kylie Jenners of the world to go and white label their own product, like it's not going to be long before influencer sales, like let's say, take it from an affiliate perspective, right? So, well, first off, I think it was influencers just got paid to do posts. Well, then that's kind of stopped ROIing. And so like, oh, well, we'll give you affiliate deals. And then all of a sudden it was like affiliate deals, but then, an influencer's next move was to go to like white labeled products. And just like you said, like these are going to be garbage products. Like there's not much brand in it. Like you're diluting personal brand to bolt on a cash product. And I think, like you said, that the long tail of that is that you have diluted brand through and through. I mean, that always happens. Like, like it's anything. You're like building brand versus sales, right? And you're like, oh, let's cut some corners so we can keep the lights on and keep the sales going. But at the end of the day, you're just cutting your brand in all future sales. And like that's like building a brand or product, building a company 101. And I think all these influencers are kind of getting to that point where it's like, oh, well, when the river stops flowing, they're going to scramble and try to earn cash however they can, which is going to hurt brand, which, long-term hurts company or asset value.
Well, I mean, we see it already with celebrities and their tequilas, right?
Right.
They'll come from one place. There's one location makes all the tequila for all celebrities that they just slap their logo on. So it's very interesting. And I think, adding into that, the ramifications of these new iOS changes, which I'm curious to hear sort of your feelings on that. It's brand is going to become ever more important. Being able to prove ROI is going to be sort of a never ending pit of despair right? We've already
Right.
started going through that this past 2 months, May and June both. It's interesting to sort of see how things have shifted, and sort of when we're talking to these brands, we've been so lucky in being able to leverage Facebook's data, because Facebook has been number one across the board in advertising, leveraging their data to be able to really tack the individual. So we're saying, hey, individual, we know you like XYZ products. We're going to continue to show you them. Whereas now we can't do that anymore. We have to think of it as larger cohorts and segments. And even on top of that, our tracking may be off, right? Because Facebook is now, even when they're providing results, these results are based off of their own formulas. They're not necessarily tracking exactly per se. So then as a brand, you have to literally take a step back, look at your overall MER, your marketing efficiency rating, and break down total revenue divided by total spend. What's our momentum been looking like for the past couple of years into now? But to have that conversation is very tough, because everyone's been so used to like, hey, here's your ROAS, here's your ROI right up in front. Here's how you make your decisions. And that's gone, and that's going to be gone for at least for the foreseeable future.
No, this is, to me, super fascinating. And it goes back. I mean, to me, it was like we had this window of, like you said, amazing metrics. How amazing they really were is still up for debate. How accurate they really were, but it created a different kind of marketer, right? Like, let's go back to Mad Men. All these old school marketers, like a lot of that was off gut intuition, man. Like, you're just like, did that work? Did it not work? And like, we went into an era where like Facebook gave us ridiculous amounts of data. And I think there was a lot of false assumptions off of some of that data. And, it also created, so within the podcast world, it's like, it created some weird things where it's like, if you can't show ROI for every single thing, then it didn't work. Like, we don't spend $1. Like, that's not how it works. You can't just not spend any dollar that doesn't ROI, because you may spend $10 over here that helps this $100 ROI, and like, there's just like, there's so many more puzzle pieces to it than just looking at the Facebook metrics. Now, the Facebook metrics are great. It was like one of the most amazing eras, right? But let's be honest, like, it's probably going to go away. And then you just have to ask yourself, like, okay, what did we do before Facebook? And maybe that's the thing though. Like, when everyone's doing something, maybe it's time to look other places, right? And you're already seeing people like the direct mail marketing, how it's like resurging back, right? And all these other things. Email marketing has kind of got its own issues with like Gmail kind of being the new captor of that. But it just goes back to like understanding attention, building brand. And I think the problem that Facebook created is that it focused too much on making sales and not on brand. And we had a lot of marketers that just went into like sales mode or ROI mode. It was like, how could I make every dollar turn into two, and not thinking about like, how do I build an awesome brand? At the end of the day, it's like, it was like SEO, right? Like, everyone back in the day, everyone was trying to game SEO, try to figure it out, right? But it boiled down to like being a good company. That was it. And like creating good value, providing value to the customer. And like, at the end of the day, that should be your basis for marketing. And it's super handy. Don't get me wrong, have, Facebook ads that you can tweak and play with them. And like, oh man, every dollar I spend, I make $1.25. That's handy. But, I think all of those things are like, they're not here forever. Like, just take them when you get them and look for the next thing. Always be looking for like, where's attention moving to?
Yeah. Well, and I think we could see that in the past too, right? And by the past, I mean like 6 months ago.
back in the old days.
Yeah. Where we're seeing omni-channel was really making a resurgence in 2020, right? Where it was like, we had to be on all channels all the time, everywhere, because that's where people were, right?
Mm-hmm.
But on top of that, you also had to have, if you have your store is locked down on par. You even have ads pushing people to your store as well as pushing to your e-commerce store. And then obviously monitoring inventory fluctuations. And then, 2020 totally crapped on that with inventory issues. But to be able to, we looking at the numbers from when this omni-channel push really started to occur, we saw that if you had campaigns on at least 3 or more platforms, you increased your purchase rate by 297%. So it's 3x. Here's the problem, and here's where all the conversations with every brand would go, is it would go, well, hey, how do you prove ROI? Because we're pulling attribution from each one of these single channels, right? And it's like,
Mhm.
well, okay, well, here's the rabbit hole we're about to go down. We can either look at last click, first click, assorted click. We can, look at W models, U models. We can look at like the weight of all of it, and we're really not going to know, right? At the end of the day,
Yeah.
because let's say we did do that. We said, okay, we see that most of the last click attribution is going towards Google. We're going to spend more money on Google and less on everything else. And then your conversion rate drops and your purchases drop, like everything drops. And you're like, why is that happening? We saw that this provided the best ROI. Why can't we scale this? And that was the issue. Well, now that leads into the age in which we're at now, where even within these platforms, you only track in 7-day. Within Google, even though Google Analytics and Google's claiming that, hey, our platform's not affected, it's like, okay, everyone's affected. Like, don't lie to me. I mean, we've had conversations with third-party analytics teams that like do this for a living, and they knew this was coming like 5 years ago, and still, it's like it's not accurate.
Oh, really?
And so you have to go back to what would we have done 10 years ago?
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
We would look at total revenue that we got this month divided by all the money we spent on everything, and that would be our MER, or our new ROI. Right?
Yeah. Well, do you think that like it moves? Do you think the today's marketer moves from, like you go back to like, let's say like Mad Men was kind of like the old school, right? It was all gut. And then it became a very like what's the baseball movie where they like the kids all about data? You know what I'm talking about?
Oh yeah, Moneyball.
Moneyball. So like becomes like Moneyball, where it's like the marketer, new age marketer is just like running all these numbers and he's going to have the perfect answer. Do you think it's like somewhere in the middle going forward, or do you feel like it's going to ebb or flow one way or the other?
Well, I think for right now, from what we can see and sort of what's occurring for us performance agencies that rely on data, it's definitely hurt us. It's sort of the philosophical viewpoint. So each brand is different. Each brand has a different philosophical view on things. If you're a brand selling $60 shirts and most people buy, 80% of your buyers buy within the first 24 hours, you're not gonna have a problem at all. Like it's not gonna affect anything. But say I'm selling furniture online. I have an e-commerce furniture store, and the average sales cycle is 15 days, right? And the average sales price is $1,000. You're going to have major issues tracking where your ROI is coming from. You're going to have to spread the wealth and just live there. You have to live with it how it is, and it's frustrating, right? Because we've been treated so well over the past 5 years, and being like, hey, I can run a business if I'm not only profitable, I'm making a little bit of money in my pocket if I'm 3x, and I can monitor everything. And now it's like, are you? Like, let's hope. Let's spend a bunch of money this month and hope that we're there. But I think as far as like if you're going to look at those who are going to be the most successful, those brands, it's going to be those who have already been successful in the past with building brand and community.
Totally.
That's like number one. I think no matter what, we've seen it even during this whole analytical age, they still did better. If you could do that, if you can build a community around your brand, build some loyalty, and really grow that way. It may be more difficult. It may cost more upfront, but that's going to increase longevity. That's going to increase growth substantially in the future.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree. And it goes back to, SEO days where it was like, just do the right thing and you'll win, and everyone was trying to game the system. And it was like, okay, he who, builds a good brand, builds a good community, does right by their customers is going to win. And, there's always like people who win outside of that, game the system or whatever. But I think when it comes down to any of these things, you look at like all these changes, Facebook algorithms, all these things, and it's like the best thing you can do is try to build a great company, great brand, most importantly, great brand, and build that community around that brand. And then it's like, okay, no matter what's going to happen, you have those customers to wave the storm or to weather the storm. And it's like, you're going to keep moving forward.
Yeah, no. And that's really what's not continuing to crush it now, but it's going to continue to do better in the future because total spend and ads is going to be lower. right? And people are gonna have to find other avenues. That's why we're seeing resurgence in direct mail. That's why our partners who do TV and radio are seeing a resurgence. It's like people go a little bit crazy. They knew the platforms were working for them. Now they don't know. So what do? You just go back to the last thing that you felt good about. Right. So let's go.
Yeah. Which is like, you didn't know if magazine ads were working. You didn't know if
Yeah.
TV ads were working, but like, I just don't know what Facebook's doing, which
Yeah.
is, that's so comical to me. Do you think that like, okay, let's just take like my brand. If we're spending $3,000 to $5,000 a month in advertising, and we're like, now we just don't have very good data, like, or we're seeing worse data, but obviously those points could be skewed. Do you think do we cut some of that revenue or cut some of that spend, I should say, or do we just keep it the same and be like, I hope it works as good as it used to?
So the tests that we're running now, that we've been running from May into June, because it's been chaotic, right? With the iOS 14.5 and then the latest 14.6 update on June 3rd. The last update has pushed adoption rates up to 70% now. So as of today, which is June 21st, adoption rates are around 70, 75%. So that's people who have opted into the latest update and whether they're allowing or not disallowing tracking.
That's impressive. I didn't think it would go that fast.
No, I thought we wouldn't really know for sure till September when they launched the latest Apple iPhone or whatever. But what that means is that's good. That's good for us. That means that we have an increased stability, right? Especially when we get to that 80 to 90% range, where then those algorithms out there, Snapchats, TikToks, Facebooks, all these algorithms can make adjustments based off of the new data. And then that we can run our tests and then learn what will now be best practices. I have about 120 SOPs in a Google Drive that I could probably just delete, right? because things have changed, and that's fine. It's chaotic, but it's sort of like where we need to push. So the tests that we're running with brands is we've been monitoring MER for the past year and a half, really, because we knew this was coming. And so we're tracking fluctuations in momentum in MER based on seasonality. It's kind of tough with 2020 because seasonality was thrown out the window. Purchase behaviors were thrown out the window. Hey, today people are they're buying hand sanitizer and toilet paper, and the next day they're not. They don't care about that anymore. We were selling swimsuits in the middle of this ice storm in February, right? Like it just doesn't make any sense. So yeah, it's just working through the rest of this year, trying to maintain some stability, right? Especially as a company that does media buying, that's really consistency is always greatest. Otherwise you become a bipolar marketer, right? One day you think you're the greatest, and the next day you're like, I need to look for a new job. You know? So
oh man, that's so accurate.
Yeah, it's sort of the nature of it. But that said, I think we don't really know for sure what iOS will do to us as advertisers. I think in general, I like the idea of not having everyone track me, but I also know it's bullshit.
Well, it's just like they're tracking you but not giving you the data.
So Apple's like, oh, we'll take, data is worth more than oil. We're going to be in control of the entire pipeline. Yeah. Right. And then Google saw them do this. And even though at first they were arguing with them about it, saying, Apple, how could you do this? Now they're like, you know what? Yeah. And, privacy is huge for us. So we're going to go ahead and release something similar for Android devices. And it's like, yeah, okay. I see where this is going. And then Apple's already pushing out these new beta testing, these new search ads for Safari. And it's yeah,
dude, like, that's interesting.
I know, you know where they're going.
Exactly where it's going.
They're trying to compete in the ad world. They hold all the data. So it'll be interesting to see if they try to take over and make some sort of platform their own. I just don't see that happening. What I do see happening is how can they use the data or sell it themselves?
Yeah. So I guess one thing I'm just totally hijacking your podcast, by the way. In your opinion, like what's the greatest like hack right now?
The greatest hack?
Yeah, marketing hack.
I don't think there's any hack. I think naturally, if you want to see who's being successful and how success is determined is basically if you, for the past year, this is sort of what it's been like. If you're doing okay, you're doing great. If you're not doing okay, it's time to do a major pivot. It's not going to work. If you've been holding on, like, to brands that we talked to last summer that we're still holding on, even into the fall Q4 that didn't do well, still holding on today, like, you just cut the cord, because it's not going to work. The problem is this app tracking transparency change is really going to affect small businesses, even, maybe not so much your local guys, but your small brands and startups. It's going to absolutely kill them. So you have to do the hard thing, which is you have to focus on brand and community when it's not ROI positive, right?
Totally.
You just
Well, it's
have
like,
to keep doing the right thing. Yeah.
but the problem with that is, like, you're always in this, like, as an entrepreneur and a small startup, you're always on this balancing beam of keeping the lights on and building this great brand, right? Like, the more money you spend on building this great brand, the more you run out and you're like, how do I pay employees? How do I pay rent? How do I pay all these things? And like, but if you just focus on paying the rent, you're never going to have a great brand, because it's like, man, it's just this pendulum. And we always, like, as entrepreneurs, we just like run back and forth, like, oh, we need to build brand. You're like, gosh, we're out of money. Like, gotta pay bills.
No, and I think most entrepreneurs, business owners, people who have been building companies for a while sort of feel along these lines too, is you get to a certain level where you're just comfortable with being uncomfortable, right?
Right.
And even if your back's against the wall, you'll figure it out.
Right. Totally.
The trick is you do have to know when to pivot.
Totally.
Like,
oh, man,
because you could get caught in the rapids and the waves and just get, you're at sea and you're like, look back 3 to 6 months. You're like, I knew where I should have pivoted and I didn't do it. I got to do it now. Oh, well, let's just do it.
Yeah.
Move.
Yeah. Because the worst thing that can happen is you sink the ship and then you have no ship to turn around, like that happens to a lot of people. They run so hard, take a widget or something, and they just like want to force it. Like, it's gotta be good. And then they pile up this giant debt trying to make this widget work. And then it's like, it was never going to work. And now, they're $200,000 in debt. Like, good luck with the next idea.
Yeah. Well, and I'm curious from your end, what hacks or what big things have you seen that, like, if you could go back, talk to yourself a year ago, what would you say?
Man, that's a great question. On the pivoting thing, like, we're always on that. Like, there's a couple of things we're trying to pivot and trying to move. I would say, the one thing that I kick myself for not really pushing, and this is even a year ago, this is like for 2 or 3 years, I've been like, man, we need to grow our email list. And it's like, we do, and it grows, but like, we don't have that dedicated focus to it that like we probably should have had. And, if I could go back like 2 years ago and be like, hey, dummy, the thing that you think is important, do it. Like, that's like just having a powerful email list. And there's huge problems with that as well, with Gmail kind of cracking down and owning email lists. But at the same time, like, that's such a great asset. And, anybody who wasn't building it pre, the Facebook changes is like, wish I had 100,000 people on my email list right now that, because at the end of the day, when you get in trouble, like, there's nothing better than 100,000 people on an email list to save you, and just be like, man, we're in trouble. Like, I gotta make a big ask, and you can do it. And that's like amazing. And like, that's a huge asset. You can't just like, I don't care how big of a Facebook group you have. You can't just go, oh man, we're in trouble. Like, we need to get $100,000 in sales tomorrow. Like, Facebook group's probably not going to do it. Let's just be honest.
Yeah. No, well, it's looking at lists and retention, especially now. And we were talking about this back in December to January, how these new iOS changes, and on top of that, Facebook's changes, basically you have to, as the brand, you have to be in control of your own first party data, right?
Yeah.
No longer can you just say Facebook, hey, here's my audience, find other people like them, right? It's just not accurate anymore.
Yeah, totally.
So even with the shifts that we're doing, we're not even half the time we're testing lookalikes, but interest groups are doing better now, which is insane to me, right? They haven't been better in 3 years, but they are now, just because we're able to segment more and be able to touch them.
That's why it's
But yeah,
important to be a little bit of everywhere, because like, at the end of the day, like you get these massive pivots, man, and all of a sudden like you need a different audience that works better, or just being able to have a little bit everywhere is it's hard. I get it. As like an entrepreneur is like, I am super limited on time. I can't do everything. We don't have the bandwidth to be everywhere. You kind of got to pick and choose a few of them, but like being all in on one platform is a slippery slope. I mean, how many entrepreneurs like, yeah, we're all in on Facebook. Facebook changed some stuff or built their company on the back of Facebook, and then that got shut down. It's like, oh, so like, you always had to have, I don't want to say an exit strategy, but a pivot strategy for sure. And that comes to audiences too, man. Like having a good email list, having, multiple social followings, and even like if you had a direct mail list or have a community in a minimum that you're like, okay, we can reach back out for return customers. Like that's powerful, because at the end of the day, if, all social puts the lock on the gate and you can't get to your own audience, at least you have other revenues.
Yeah. Well, and retention is huge. And I think a lot of startups make that mistake is just solely focus on acquisition, which is good, but they forget about retention, right? And totally. Retention is its own art, it's its own science, it's like its own way of working and doing things. And talking on this note of community and brand loyalty and retention, as we're in June now, moving into July, so we're halfway through this year, thank God. Right, we're going into 2022 soon, and we're like passing through the summer, so it's like strategies for summer. Like if you don't already have them in place, it's like good luck. But looking at Q4 this year, do you see any major e-commerce trends or shifts occurring, or any cool plans that you guys have?
I'll cover both of those. It's interesting to say like, what do you foresee? And it's like after 2020 and 2021, you're like, I gave up foreseeing a long time ago. Yeah. But we run this like snack box. It's for people in the outdoors, which is great because there's so many people that are getting into the outdoors. Outdoors is a big market push. If you want to talk about trends, like people getting in the outdoors is actually a big trend right now. And a lot of those things. Interestingly enough, we're actually, this could be a completely bad idea, but like I want to push towards actually hitting some of our corporate. So doing some more B2B. So we're direct, basically B2C, and we could add a B2B line by doing like what we're going to call office fuel. And it's like basically snacks for the office, which seems super counterintuitive because, everyone's not in the office. I see a trend of people going back to the office, and you're seeing it around town already. Like people are like, yeah, working from home was good, but like, let's get back to some version of regimented life. And I do think that there's going to be a lot of people that are kind of like just over the work from home thing. And so I'm hoping that there's a trend moving back towards offices as 2020 goes through. And so that's like, we're probably going to add the office. It could be a totally bad idea. I don't know. Got intuition right there.
Well, no, I think that there will be a trend. It'll probably start off with being forced, and they'll they'll try to be like, no, I mean, you can come in if you want, but you need to come in.
But really, like, just come in.
Now, my personal feelings on it is, we, for our office space, it's convenient to go to because I can leave work there. Right.
Totally.
Whereas when I come home, and it's where I'm at now, it's like work is at my home and my home is my work, and I can't leave it. It's like, it's just nagging me. You're making dinner and you're like, I forgot I got sent this email. It's like, it's going. It's just constantly going. And after a year and a half of that, it like eats away at your soul a little bit, and you're just like tired. You're like, I work more now than I ever have, and I don't even really do much. I just hop on a computer, and my existence is on this little machine.
Totally.
But
totally.
Some people
I think you're going to
see
it. I think you're going to see both, but I do think you're going to see a lot more people return to the office, like just, getting out of the house. Like as much as we're like, oh man, working from home is awesome. I feel like there's a lot of people in the world that do better in a group dynamic and function better in like the 1 + 1 = 3 of like having a team there. So we'll see. I don't know. I think you're going to see it flow back the other way.
I think by September, when kids go back to school, we're definitely going to know how people feel about whether or not they should go back to the office or stay at home. So dude,
I also think like there's a little bit of, when you say you're working from home, and I don't think this has happened yet, but you're now saying like you're competing for your job against someone in India or across the world, anywhere. Because what you're, like if say I employ someone who's remote, like I don't care if they live in Idaho or if they live in Tel Aviv. Like what's the difference, right? Other than the time frame. So now like you're competing against someone who makes half as much as you do. That's a slippery slope, so like making yourself a useful asset as an employee, like the e-commerce podcast. I don't know how many people are actually employed, but like you're competing against other people. And I think about that too, is like you have employees, like, do I want the employee that's, they're on they work nights while I work days. Sometimes that's good. Sometimes it's not. But at the same time, it's like a third of the price. You know what I mean? Like, so what are we competing on here?
Well, I think we'll definitely see that for menial jobs. Sort of how like for certain things that we do, it's very, manufacturing line, right? It's like step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, repeat over and over again. Those jobs that require a little more creativity, a little more thought process and critical thinking obviously won't, but you'll see, I think, more specifically with, able to shift out remote jobs, that was already sort of started that way. And now, like, we have some VAs in the Philippines and some in Venezuela, and like half of them are better than me at a lot of things. Like, it's like, man, it's amazing. So the talent pool is getting bigger too. And I think you mix that in with automation, right? Especially in the service industry.
Yeah.
It's you're gonna have a huge shift. Technology displaces workers. That's the nature of it. So I think, this whole dynamic of what we're going through now with the shortage of labor shortage and shortage of everything across the board it'll be like you're talking about the pendulum, right?
Yeah.
It'll swing back to the other side. But anyway, so hey, I appreciate you coming on.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for having me
and having a great conversation here. So where can everyone connect with you online?
Yeah. You guys can follow my podcast, The Rich Outdoors. We talk about adventure, hunting, outdoors, entrepreneurship. I do a lot with the outdoor community, outdoor recreation, entrepreneurship, talk business in that sense. So if you guys are interested in that, go check it out. That's and pretty much The Rich Outdoors anywhere you look.
Awesome, man. Hey, it was great talking to you, and we'll chat later.
Thanks, man.
Peace.